organization in the United States, and they've been in existence for about 130 years. And basically their job is to protect both children and animals from abuse, neglect, cruelty, and exploitation. And they're able to address this relationship through various campaigns where they address the problem, they raise public awareness, and they also provide tools to other social service agencies, and various people that are interested in this link between animal abuse and human violence. They help them to recognize the problem and to take steps to end the abuse and basically protect victims. So strongly does the American Humane Association believe in this link between animal abuse and human violence that they have actually registered or trademarked this title, the link. In addition to that, there is something called the National Link Coalition, which is the National Resource Center for information and resources on this connection between animal abuse and human violence. Unfortunately, the slide that had their web address on it isn't there, but I can get it for you if you're interested. Years ago, when I started with the agency, I did some public speaking with different groups that we were active with, teachers, doctors, other social service agencies that we contracted services with. And I also did a few years of the presentations here at the Child Abuse Workshop on child abuse identification and the law. And part of that presentation had this little bit of history in it about how the history of child welfare originated from laws protecting animals. The subject of that little bit of history presentation was a little girl by the name of Mary Ellen Wilson. She was born in 1964. When she was about 2 years of age, her dad died. Ultimately, her mother was forced to put her into a boarding home so that she could work and provide for the family. It wasn't long before she fell behind in her payments and visits with the child that the caregiver that she was placed with actually ended up giving her to the city's Department of Charities. And from there, Mary Ellen was placed with another family. It was done illegally. There was no documentation. There were no follow-up visits to make sure that she was being taken care of and that sort of thing. Fortunately for Mary Ellen, she had neighbors who were aware that she was being abused and neglected, and they approached a visiting mission worker who came around their area, and the woman's name was Etta Wheeler, and asked her to please look into Mary Ellen's welfare. Etta Wheeler went to Henry Berg, who at the time was the leader of an animal humane movement. He was also the founder of the ASPCA, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So actually what Henry did was he used the same formats and procedures and techniques that he had perfected over time in trying to prosecute animal cruelty cases and in protecting animals. And he used those same techniques to collect documentation, petition the courts. Mary Ellen actually testified before the judge. Henry also invited the New York Times reporters to the hearing, and of course their account of what took place brought about this great public awareness. And so various agencies and organizations then became advocates for enforcing those laws. I'm going to skip through some of these because we don't really have time. This presentation could have used really 2 hours, but what I wanted to touch on was that history actually recognizes this link between animal abuse and human violence as well. And some of the people that you're going to see here were 200 years before Mary Ellen's time. This is John Locke, and he was an English philosopher and a physician. If you remember anything from your college psychology courses, John Locke believed that at birth we're born with a blank slate, or a tabula rasa. He said that we're born without innate ideas, and that instead we derive our experience from our sense perception. John Locke is quoted as saying, "For the custom of tormenting and killing animals will by degrees harden their minds, even towards men. And they who delight in the suffering and destruction of inferior creatures will not be very compassionate or benign to those of their own kind." And I found this interesting. "Our practice takes notice of this in the exclusion of butchers from juries of life and death. And indeed, I think that people should be accustomed from their cradles to be tender to all sensible creatures." So if you were a butcher, you weren't able to sit on a jury of life or death. Immanuel Kant was an 18th century German philosopher, and he said that we must practice kindness towards animals, for he who is cruel to animals becomes hard also in his dealings with men. And we can judge the heart of a man by his treatment of animals. You may have heard variations of that in certain things, because he believed that animal nature has a lot of analogies to human nature as well. Lord Thomas Erskine was a British lawyer and politician. In 1809, he wrote the Cruelty to Animals Bill that he presented to Parliament. Basically, this was a bill for preventing malicious and wanton cruelty to animals. And he said, "This extension of benevolence to objects beneath us become habitual by a sense of duty inculcated by law, and thus will reflect back upon our sympathies for one another, so that I may venture to say firmly to your lordships that the bill I propose to you, if it shall receive the sanction of Parliament, will not only be an honor to the country, but an era in the history of the world." He argued that this dominion that we have over animals was given to us by God as a moral trust. And although his bill was accepted by the lordships, it was opposed in Commons, probably because it was incompatible at that time with popular sporting events like fox hunting and horse racing. And, you know, isn't that sort of how we come to support certain changes over time? You know, I'm all for this or that, so long as it doesn't impact on what I really want or desire. Jeremy Bentham. When I first saw his picture, I thought it was Ben Franklin glasses, but Jeremy Bentham was an English philosopher as well. He was a jurist and a social reformer. He was often hailed as the first patron saint of animal rights. He argued that it was the ability to suffer that should be the benchmark of how we treat other beings. He said, "If rationality were the criterion, many humans, including infants and the disabled, would also have to be treated as though they were things." Basically, his statement was that it's not a question of whether they can reason or can they talk, but can they suffer. Henry Salt was a former master at Eton University, English writer, a campaigner for social reform, an ethical vegetarian, an anti-vivisectionist, and a naturalist. He argued in favor of animal rights rather than animal welfare, and basically being that he didn't feel that we should just fight for animals to have bigger cages or be more humanely slaughtered. He believed that animals, we should fight for their rights overall. He also argued against the presumption that a human life necessarily has more value than a non-human one. He said, "If we are ever going to do justice to the lower races, we must get rid of the antiquated notion of a great gulf fixed between them and mankind, and must recognize the common bond of humanity that unites all living beings in one universal brotherhood. I think I would have liked Henry Salt. We seem to share a lot of similarities in our thoughts and lifestyles. As many as 4% of the population are sociopaths who have no empathy or affectionate feelings for humans or animals. That quote is taken from a book written by Martha Stout, who is a PhD psychologist. The title of her book was The Sociopath Next Door, The Ruthless versus the Rest of Us. It was written in 2006, so I'm going to venture to say that statistic of 4% is probably a little bit higher today. So what does a sociopath look like? They've been described to be charming, yet delusional. They're never wrong. They don't show any empathy. They tend to play the victim. They lie. They cheat. They twist your words. They always seem to have to win. And they do something called gaslighting. Have you ever heard of that term? Did you guys? Okay, I never heard of it.
It's a movie, Gaslight.
Okay, never saw the movie. But when I read the definition of it, it sounded absolutely right. Like I had, identified it with people I'd met over the years. Basically, it's, a tactic of a manipulator. They intentionally set up this misdeed, and then they question their victim's sanity and, the whole fact that they're reacting probably appropriately to this misdeed. This quote is taken from a book from 2013 titled Psychopath Free, Recovering from Emotionally Abusive Relationships with Narcissists, Sociopaths, and Other Toxic People. Let's talk about some famous killers, some serial killers, spree killers, and mass murderers. And just for definition, a serial killer is someone who kills 3 or more people over a period of more than a month with some downtime in between. And a spree killer is someone who kills usually at 2 or more locations with almost no downtime. And then you have your mass murderers who typically kill a number of people, usually simultaneously, over a relatively short period of time. So I'm not going to talk about all of these people, but I just wanted to give you an indication of what their childhoods were a little bit. Albert DeSalvo, does anybody recognize him, who he was well known for? That's the Boston Strangler, okay? He killed multiple women over his time of killing. And as a child, he used to like to trap dogs and cats in boxes and shoot arrows at them. Kip Kinkle, down here. Kip Kinkle was a high school freshman, and his incident actually took place in Springfield, Oregon. You might recall that. Anyway, he murdered both his parents and then went to high school and killed 2 classmates and injured approximately 20 other students. And he was fond of decapitating cats and mounting their heads on sticks. He blew up cows. He dissected live squirrels. And he liked to stuff lit firecrackers into the mouths of cats. And he liked to brag about his abuses. Henry Lucas, this is an older person. He was abused as a child by his mother. She used to dress him in girls' clothing and sausage curls and send him to school sort of as a form of embarrassment. She also denied him medical treatment. He injured an eye, and because she denied medical treatment, he actually went on to lose it. One time she beat